Welcome back to the Postscript, the podcast about films where the discourse ended with an ellipsis rather than a period. I'm Chris Hall.
I'm Sebastian.
I'm Mateo.
And on this podcast, we will be reassessing films of recent memory where the discourse was left unsettled. We will try to provide more definitive takes on films that generated a lot of buzz upon release, but their reputations have since become murky. Movies that make you ask, where are they now? Right? But before we go any further, for those who have listened to any previous episode of the pod, you may be experiencing that sensation, like when you pop your ears and you're like, how long was I going listening like that? And now you feel like you can like hear grass grow. But yes, the Postscript boys are rocking brand spanking new mics, a courtesy of my brother Andrew, who generously donated these to the pod. So shout out him. I mean, just supporting the pod. Seed level investor. So now it doesn't sound like we're talking about movies like over walkie talkies. we've gone from 480p to now we're inside your walls. So we're making history in this pod on two fronts today, because not only are we breaking in the new equipment, we are joined by our first ever guest on the show, Vance Osteen, who is also one of our buddies back at UF in our film club and is currently attending FSU's graduate film program. Vance, thank you so much for being here today.
I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. Because this week, well, actually, quick recap on last week. Last week, we discussed Gareth Edwards' Godzilla from 2014, where we determined that the movie makes some choices that, you know, people's feelings may vary greatly on, but a lot of the movie's qualities seem to be largely misremembered and in some cases wrongly assessed. So that's where we landed on that. But this week, we will be discussing a film of more recent memory, our first horror film on the pod, Jordan Peele's 2019 sophomore effort, Us.
There's a family in our driveway.
It's probably the neighbors. But y'all scared of a family? Hi, can I help you?
Zora, put your shoes on.
If you want to get crazy, we can get crazy.
Vance has some Us takes. Vance has some thoughts about Us. And so we had to get them on the pod. We're very, very excited about this. So, Us 2019. This film follows Adelaide Wilson, played by Lupita Nyong'o, and her family, who are forced to fight for their survival when attacked by a group of doppelgangers of their family. The film was widely praised by critics upon release, and it made $256 million at the box office, which for an R-rated horror movie especially is hugely successful. And that was all done on a budget of $20 million, which is roughly 5 times larger than the budget of Peele's debut, Get Out. And also less than a third of the size of his follow-up film, Nope, which had a budget of about $70 million. And that's kind of where I want to start this conversation, because this movie at this point in time kind of has like middle child syndrome, you know? Because like between being sandwiched between like the surprise hit of Get Out, which simply calling Get Out a hit would be a massive undersell. But between that and the audacious, sweeping spectacle of Nope, this one receives, relatively speaking, the least amount of like love and kind of gushing over, right? And I don't think we can really go any further without talking about Get Out a little more specifically, because Get Out was, on a historical level, one of the most successful directorial debuts of all time. You know, like it is, I mean, it was a critical darling. It made a lot of money. It was nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, and Best Screenplay, which it won. And Jordan Peele became the first African-American to ever win that award. And the movie is the closest thing to like an instant modern classic that you can possibly get. I mean, it was also one of the few films from the past decade to be included in the most recent iteration of like Sight and Sound's top 100 films of all time. Like from the critics list there. And then I forgot about this. When the Writers Guild in 2021, they voted on like the best screenplays of the 21st century, Get Out came in at number 1. Like writers are like, no, this thing's goated. Like, I mean, this thing gets taught in like film analysis and like screenwriting classes. So
I literally was taught it.
Yeah.
I went to Italy for film school, and I was literally taught Get Out. So
no, yeah. Exactly. So all that goes to say, there was a lot of anticipation for what Peele was going to do next. You know, like it's like how do you even follow up a success like that? Because whatever you do, like it will be compared to Get Out till the cows come home, and like the shadow of its impact will loom over it. And the result was Us, right? Where he leaned more into the horror on this time around, as opposed to Get Out, which had a lot more thriller in it. And there's this weird like kind of annoying discourse of like people being like, oh, like Get Out is barely horror. And it's like, relax. It's like, that's not, that doesn't matter. Okay. But the movie was really successful, like we said. I mean, like it didn't completely buckle underneath the weight of expectations, which is a win in its own right. And one of the most like prominent narratives surrounding the film was like people going, okay, like Peele clearly isn't a one-hit wonder, you know, not a one-hit wonder. This is super original, very distinct vision. It's getting people talking, but and then insert all the Get Out comparisons, you know, like it was still being compared to it, and people were still like, I still think I prefer Get Out. And there were also some criticisms that, like, as compared to how like airtight and focused Get Out and its themes were, and how like easy it is to like really mine that movie, Us was, I mean, it was dealing with a lot more and also even like bigger ideas. And some think maybe its reach may have exceeded its grasp, you know, upon first release. The film was also notably completely shut out at the Oscars, and Lupita Nyong'o's dual performance as, you know, Adelaide and then like the doppelganger not getting nominated was universally considered a snub. That was kind of crazy, but that's more so of like the Oscars' long track record of not really respecting horror movies. So all of that being said, I want to take us back to 2019. Now, I want to start with Vance. I want to start with what your initial reaction was in 2019 and just kind of what your relationship with the movie has been broadly.
I know you touched on this a little bit already, but to talk about my relationship with Us, I have to go back to Get Out. So I'll go back to 2016 before I jump into 2019. But I had like a weirdly sort of unique experience watching Get Out because I saw it on a military base at like 3 in the afternoon on like a Wednesday. And so we had to do like a pledge of allegiance before the movie started. And so to sit down and watch Get Out after having, you know, gone through that was a very surreal experience. And I think that added a lot of texture to what the movie was trying to say, at least for me.
Right.
And so, you know, it's 2019. Like I'm at this kind of weird transitional point in my life, about to go off to university, and I go and I watch Us with all these preconceived ideas as far as like what I thought Jordan Peele's follow-up would be. And you know, I saw it like opening night with a packed audience, and I think I walked out, as a lot of people seem to when it came out, sort of cold by it, because everyone walked in with this preconceived idea of what Us would be, and then it wasn't that, because it's a little shaggier than Get Out. It's a little looser. Its scope is a lot more ambitious. Not to get too much into my like current thoughts on the movie, but at the time, like you know, that left me sort of distanced from it a bit. Like I thought it was good, but I was left a bit disappointed, and that doesn't reflect how I feel about it now. Like having seen it more recently, my opinion has kind of changed, but I'll get more into that later.
Right.
But
right.
when I initially saw it, my impressions were that he was suffering from the like sophomore slump that a lot of like successful indie filmmakers kind of struggle with when they're given more studio resources and more money. And that left me kind of cold. I don't know if you guys have a similar experience with it, but that's how I felt watching it.
It's interesting. So I liked to Get Out when it came out, but I think my impression of Get Out, and again, not to make this the Get Out show, I thought it was like maybe just like a tad bit overrated for me. But watching Us again, there was definitely that impression of the screenplay not kind of having that like sort of like airtight internal consistency that Get Out had. But I remember Us being a lot scarier than Get Out, and I was like genuinely like really creeped out by a lot of what happens in Us. And like, I mean, that trailer, the fact that like they kind of like based like the entire score of the movie on like a hip hop track, like I Got Five on it, and they like did this like little like horror twist on it. That like song in the trailer, it just like stuck with me, and it's kind of like iconic. That's like stuck in my head. It's an earworm, like incredible theme. But like there definitely was like that impression, like walking out of the movie, and like I don't want to like spoil too much of the plot, but like it's kind of like the ending kind of left me like scratching my head a little bit, because I sort of was expecting it all to tie back and to like kind of like make perfect airtight sense in a way that it really didn't. But at the same time, I was still just so like just kind of shocked by how like creepy it was and unsettling it was. And so I think to this day, I think I still almost prefer it to Get Out, but I want to I want to watch it again and really kind of make those opinions a little more concrete now that I have a little kind of a wider movie vocabulary to talk about this movie with.
Love that. Seb, what about you?
I did not watch this movie in theaters, actually. I was a massive fan of Get Out and Jordan Peele. I had watched all of Key and Peele like forever beforehand,
Right.
which is why his ascension was like so gratifying to watch. But I think I was still a bit shaggy to the Scooby Doo of like I was spooked of scary movies, and I did not want to really watch it in a theater. So after it came out in theaters, after I had heard all of the discourse being like, oh, like critics are giving like Jordan Peele a bit of a pass about like they're going easy on him because of Get Out. And because I saw a lot of people who were not fans of this movie at all. They're saying like some people were saying like it was a straight up miss. So it made me feel more comfortable waiting until after theaters to watch the movie, and I did, and I watched it by myself midnight. Like I still made the atmosphere as as good as it could be in a more controlled setting is how I preferred it on my own terms. I still remember really enjoying it, but at the same time I was like, yikes! There's a lot of things in here that like Mateo said, loose is a good term. It felt like he didn't think this one out nearly as enough as he did for Get Out. Get Out was like a 10, 15-year project for Jordan. Whereas this one, it felt like he kind of cooked up and, like you just wanted to like make another banger. And I might be being very unfair to this film. That's very possible. That's how it felt in the moment from the first watch, at least.
Right. Yeah. All I remember, I remember being hyper aware of the Get Out comparisons at the time. And when I first watched it, I remember thinking like, okay, like comparisons aside, like if this was made by anybody else, like if this was anyone else's second movie, we'd be hitting the Palpatine like, we will watch your career with great interest. Like this is like, it's maybe a little unfair. And I thought it was still dope. I was like, I haven't seen anything quite like this. But yeah, I think I do kind of prefer Get Out a little bit. And one thing we keep saying, the word we keep using is almost just like satisfying. And for lack of a better word, like Get Out very much so is that. Like by the end of that movie, everything is all tied up in just like such a nice little bow, like everything set up does get a payoff. It's so, again, it's airtight, but it is still able to be like, talked about and analyzed. And I mean, like you're still able to like write essays in the class about it, which is kind of like the magic of that movie, is that it's so succinct and straightforward, but you can still like, have like Socratic seminars about it. While Us, again, it's dealing with bigger ideas. And I think something we may return to is how, where some people bumped on it was maybe the lack of answered questions or the lack of resolution in some ways. But that kind of leads into a debate of just like the power of asking a question to the audience as opposed to answering it for them. And I think that's something we'll return to a lot, maybe in the post game. But I want to talk about kind of Peele as a director generally, because I mean, shout out the AMC $5 fan favorites. For like playing Get Out again last week. It was pretty much my first rewatch ever of it. And while watching, I was thinking how where the direction really shines in it is in not necessarily like these, like stunning images. I mean, and obviously the sunken place visual is amazing, but I was thinking about how I watched Cure, the Kurosawa movie for the first time recently. We can have a whole Cure pod. Don't even get me started. But like that is after watching the film, I was like, it was like maybe the biggest jump scare was me saying after the film that the budget was only $1 million, and I was like, whoa! I was like. And like a sign of amazing directing almost is that you don't think about the price of it once. Like that movie is as well directed as it could possibly be. And because of that, you're just so locked into the movie and everything it wants you to feel. You're not even thinking about how much it may have cost. And you can almost say a little bit about It Follows as well. It Follows is really, really cheap and has like, the monster is just a person walking, but it's so well directed, you don't even think about that. All of that being said, Get Out, again, was a very small budget. And I think Mateo mentioned this in his Letterboxd review, is almost like a chamber piece. It's like largely one, maybe two locations, but you never notice it while watching. Like, you're just so engaged in the story. And it's directing wise, it's more so like a masterclass of like tonal direction more than anything else. And while it does have some great images and it is well shot, it is the screenplay, that kind of shines more than anything else. But as Peele's kind of, been granted a larger budget and perhaps greater creative freedom and maybe just more confidence on his later projects, I feel like from my memories of Us and Nope, he's become a much more like visually like arresting filmmaker. And I mean, Nope maybe deserves his own pod because it's just like where some people bumped on Us, they bumped even more on Nope, and the whole like things left unanswered, just like all these ideas. But he's become a much more like sweeping filmmaker. We'll get to that another time. But I'm very excited to see what the jump is, again, from just a like visual storytelling standpoint from Get Out to Us for Peele. But yeah, so what do you guys feel about that? Do you have thoughts on that, or are there other things you're looking forward to specifically on a rewatch? What are you guys thinking?
To echo Mateo's point a little bit about, I guess just Peele as visual filmmaker. Even now, like rewatching Get Out like relatively recently within the past like week or two, I think it's a bit overrated as far as like just the product as a whole. I hate referring to like a film that way, but
right,
just for the sake of the argument. But it's Peele is kind of a slave to the screenplay in Get Out, whereas a lot of the walking and the like direction kind of feels like a TV movie to me at certain points.
Interesting.
I think with Us and Nope, like you can kind of see that linear progression as a visual stylist, where Peele becomes more in conversation with the rest of like film history. Like it feels like he's really tapping into like, especially like silent cinema, more in Nope than Us. And I won't even talk about Nope because that deserves its own dissection. But you can feel him kind of stretch his wings a little bit as he progresses beyond Get Out. With more studio resources and more freedom to just kind of play around and expand his visual palette. I think, and I hope that you guys on rewatch will agree that I think, despite what any chagrin that you may have with Us's screenplay, I think that Peele, the visual director, is leagues better in Us than it is in Get Out.
That's an interesting point. I mean, I think that Jordan has very much been a very good idea maker. There's way better term for that. But
sure.
what I mean to say is that when he was doing Key and Peele, there's a lot of specific skits that felt so creative and so like they stood out more than like any other like SNL skit you might see because of just the ambition of its idea or just how unique it was. And similarly, when you get to Get Out visually, you're absolutely right. Not really what people talk about with that movie. It's more so like, oh wow, what an interesting concept! Like the twists and turns that everything takes, and the ride that he takes you on throughout the story and how it's paced. That's what they mean by like tight. It's paced so well. But yeah, visually, obviously nothing to really like do backflips over. Us, I am very excited though. Us is exactly what y'all are exactly saying what I'm looking for in this rewatch, because I am very familiar with some of the things in this film that I had trepidations about and was not a big fan of from my first watch. Those are fresh in my memory still, which means it had an impact. It's not like, oh, I can just forget about this movie.
It wasn't just
but at
vapor.
the same time,
yeah.
Exactly. I still want to give the visuals maybe more of a chance than I did my first watch. I feel like I didn't give those enough credence. And so that is what I'm excited for this time around.
There's a term that Alfred Hitchcock kind of like invented about vertigo. And in Vertigo, there's this scene where like he's like following Madeline Elster, like one of the characters around, and she just disappears into a hotel. And there's really no explanation for like how that works or how it happens. Like it's like the one time that the movie just kind of like breaks like basic screenwriting logic. And he referred to that moment as like, this is like a fridge scene. This is an icebox scene, because when the viewer gets home and he like opens up his fridge to get something to eat, it's going to pop back into his mind. He's just going to think about it again. And
I love that.
And I wonder, like, I think maybe for me, like on rewatch, I'm excited to appreciate those like moments where like the movie's logic is kind of like not really explicable by like normal means. I mean, I want to like appreciate those more as those kind of like icebox moments where it's like, well, this is like kind of bizarre, but like I can't stop thinking about it. Like that's kind of the lens that I'm coming into this with, so that I can get a little more out of it than maybe I did on the first time.
Right. Yeah. It's always so. Like sometimes the best types of movies are the ones where it's when they ask the director in an interview, like, what did this scene mean? And then they'll ask back, like, well, how did it make you feel? You know, it's like, what, like
Right.
What do you think it means? And sometimes that's way more interesting. And I think that's what Us is going for a little more. And again, what Nope is definitely going for in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And because especially coming after Get Out is, you know, built in this like setup, payoff way. And again, Us is not afraid to leave things unresolved. And I love, I can't stop thinking about that phrase you use, Vance, of like being a slave to the script and Get Out. I think that's so fascinating. And when I was rewatching, I was thinking like, there were a couple of moments, and this is something Steph and I have talked about a little bit, of like when you're watching a movie or a show and you can almost like see the script like on the screen while you're watching it. It's like you can almost like see like the actors like reading the lines or something like that, or see like how the director is directing it. You're seeing the scenes a little
written
bit.
out words.
Yeah, it feels written in some ways, and I did feel that a little bit in Get Out. Like there were some moments where, it was just like script above all. You know, like this is all in service of these words. And visually, I mean, that movie can get away a lot by just saying like, okay, let's just put the camera on Kaluuya. And let's just sit on his face and let him cook, which it works. I mean, like, the Kaluuya is good enough to warrant that. And so we might be going from Get Out to Us. We might be leaving Us saying like, Peele a lot more sauce this time around. You know, like he's cooking a little more in that front, which I'm very excited about. And so and so we can kind of go into maybe our last thoughts for this rewatch. And we've already hinted at a little bit, but yeah, Vance has kind of already undergone this substantial rewatch reassessment with Us. And so just kind of going into this rewatch, like what would you say to us? Like what do you want us to be most keeping an eye out for on this rewatch? What resonated with you the most on your rewatch that you're like, oh, you should be looking for this because this really unlocked it for me?
I would say on rewatch, sort of like let loose a little bit, just like let the movie kind of wash over you. Like, for me, like the thing that kind of unlocked it, like I felt like I was approaching it the wrong way. Whereas like Get Out feels like a very like temporal movie, right? Like it's stimulating a lot of your like logical like sense. And that movie's like tight as well. I don't want to feel like I'm underselling Get Out. Like it's a good movie, but there's just something about Us and to a greater extent Nope, where it's like he's sort of transitioning away from that to like something more sensorial, where he's allowing these images and these feelings to kind of take the reins over like the actual like scene to scene logic, maybe. So I would say like on a rewatch, like don't think about it, just feel it. You know, you just gotta go right.
You're talking to the right folks with that line.
the Us Tenet double feature inbound.
Say that's a movie that deserves reevaluation, if anything.
You have no idea. It is.
That's the movie that arguably We started this thing.
Yeah. Well, the Tenet month is gonna go crazy.
Yeah.
Please, I would listen to a whole month on Tenet. Just break it down.
Say no more. Say no more.
Uninterrupted. We don't take any sleep or eating breaks.
Yeah.
Just talk about Tenet for a whole month.
We pull an iCarly 24 hours on Tenet.
No, I love that. But no, I love those shouts, Vance, for sure. So what are you gonna say?
I was gonna say my final thoughts before going to us. One is Lupita was heavily almost she rose above the film itself. That she was the conversation for a good period, saying lock for best actress, she or at least a nomination at least.
Yeah.
But so I am very excited to not only revisit her, but the performances around her and see if the strength of the acting is really, something that's as prevalent as it was in Get Out, because I remember Get Out being a very strong actors movie as well. And honestly, I feel like Jordan is also a very good actress director. So I am excited about that. And then lastly, Jordan tackles very big social issues in his films, and he's not tackling the same things in different ways necessarily in the three movies. They're very different issues. So it's more like I want to see if he actually gets to his point, if he sets up the problem and offers his viewpoint on it or his own take in a succinct way that I feel like is both, satisfying and coherent. I feel like it's very easy when you have such an ambitious idea and plot and all these characters and you're almost setting up your own world. That's as far as I'm going to go without spoiling things. That you kind of lose your message a bit. You're like, wait, what is this movie about again? So I want to see, if maybe that is something that he actually did better than I gave him credit for the first time. So that is what I'm going to be looking for as well, but beyond just the visuals. Sure. Yeah.
I mean, we talked about supporting cast. I want to. This movie does have Tim Heidecker in it.
People forget this.
I'm kind of eager. I remember, I don't know why, because I was not that much of a Tim and Eric fan, but I remember being fascinated that Tim Heidecker was going to be in this movie.
Right.
And so
that's a choice.
It's kind of like a small point, but I am kind of excited to get back to old Tim, see what he channels in another, very interesting kind of performance, interesting characters for sure.
No, totally. And his wife in the movies is Elizabeth Moss. And back in 2019, that was a headline that Elizabeth Moss gonna be in the new Peele. But when you see her role in the movie, that's really funny that people that was a headline, like that. But I will say specifically, again, without spoiling it, because we are still in the pre-watch. There's one shot that takes place in Tim Heidecker's and Elizabeth Moss's house. It just goes wide and you see through these glass panels in the house. That shot will never leave me. I will just say that when we're talking about things like a fridge moment or things just sticking with us. Yep, that's the one. And we'll talk a lot about a little more in the post game. But
I don't remember that shot. I'm excited to watch that shot. I don't remember it.
Yeah. I know exactly what he's talking about.
Yeah, he knows that. Yeah, that was my 3 a.m. I wake up like the Monsters Inc. kid. Okay, that's that shot's back. But
there's a shot like that for me in Us as well. It's not that one, but there is a shot that I wake up in a cold sweat at 3 a.m. and I think about how the fuck did he pull that off? It's incredible. You'll know it. You'll know when you see it.
Right. Shoot, I'm so excited. Thank you all for listening this far. Again, Vance will be on the posting. Do not fret for all the Vance heads out there. But again, just a breath of fresh air already in this pre-watch. But yes, we will see you all on the other side.
They know where we are. We need to move and keep moving. They won't stop until they kill us. Or we kill them.
And we're back. Us 4 have defeated our bloodthirsty doppelgangers, or at least presumably. We'll find out once the rest of us start speaking. If we got But I mean, yeah. So let's throw it to Seb. Like he's just. But without further ado, I want to dive right into our general reactions post rewatch, and I want to start with Vance, who we already also welcome back, Vance. They are here. The haters don't want to see a 4 stack on the postscript, but we're doing it. Who can now give us more details on their almost like 180 with this movie that we hinted at in the pregame. So Vance, hit us.
Yeah. So I know I touched upon this a little bit in the pregame, but I really had like rewatching Us the first time before seeing Nope again last year, had this kind of revelation as far as like I felt as if I was approaching the movie the wrong way, and rewatching it again this week because I watched Get Out, Us, and Nope kind of back to back to back to like track his progression as a director. And like, not only do I think that Us is like leagues better than Get Out, I think it is like one of the best American films of the past like 20 years. I would say.
Fire me up. Like, we're here. We're here. Okay, that's a lot to unpack, but just broadly, like what?
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like a lot more accomplished than Get Out, formally and thematically, even if it's not as tight of a drum. I would say it's a little gangly. It's a little more lackadaisical as far as like how it kind of gets into the conflict and how it feeds the audience that information. But I still think the screenplay is extremely like efficient in the way that it like sets everything up and pays it off inevitably, or even the things that it doesn't directly answer. But I think especially in the imagery and like the more thematic like details that we'll get into later, I think Peele is kind of cemented himself like in the tradition of like the great Hollywood filmmakers of like the 30s, 40s, and 50s. Like there are elements of like Fritz Lang in here. There's elements of like John Ford in here. Like he's pulling from like the history of cinema in order to cement his own place in that history. And I think we can kind of unpack that more as we go along, but that's what sort of stuck with me rewatching it again last year, and especially rewatching it now. Call me crazy, but that's my read on the movie.
No, we're here for what we're here for. Mateo, how about you? What are you thinking?
I'm very much, I think, in agreement with Vance on a lot of what I just heard. I think, I mean, already from like the very beginning, like those when you have that kind of like when you have the beach, the carnival, and you're flashing back to Adelaide's youth, like those like low like child POV dolly shots, like already it's like I'm just lapping those up. Like I just love how in control he is of the camera. Like I think like this movie kind of is the beginning of Jordan Peele's fascination. I mean, there's certainly some of that in Get Out, but he's like growing it more here of his fascination with like just like bizarre, inexplicable events, and how much that like shapes the way that he approaches like the themes in his movies. Like it's such an interesting movie. I watched this at like 3 a.m. and I could not sleep for like another hour. Yeah, it blew me away. It's phenomenal, and yeah, I guess I'm excited to hear what some of the maybe cooler heads think about this movie, because I just don't get the hate. It does not make sense to me.
Absolutely, yeah. Seb, maybe bring us back down to earth a little bit. Seb, what do you? Where are you at?
Hate is a strong word. It's you know what, and I think since we're all kind of starting like chronologically at the beginning of the film, I want to start there as well. And easily my favorite part of the film is the first act, and obviously as we progress, I'll discuss some of the other things then. But just focusing on like the opening, very similarly, I think the camera and sound is used very effectively. And effective, it was my keyword in my notes. I used it so many times, and I was like, maybe this is just kind of like a running theme for Jordan, but he is so good at using what seems like almost normal diegetic sounds and turns it into, horror beats. So like, for example, screams at a carnival. Like everyone's screaming on a roller coaster, but all of a sudden, like he is like manifested it into something sinister, and having that as like a background drop to, this slow camera following the parents and at little Addie kind of just walking in a haze, for lack of a better word, only kind of following her instincts rather than something, more logical. I found that to be very engrossing, like very visually, directed, similar to the beginning of Get Out. Actually, there's like, the camera is following characters rather than directing where we're looking. And that slow movement allows us to absorb more, allows us to feel a little bit at unease because, like, why is everyone moving like this? Like, characters are being directed in a very specific way. You can tell Jordan is not, just saying, okay, act. Like he wants these people to be doing very specific things. For example, the dad, he's doing like this weird dance as he's like moving through the pier, and very small things like that is, on surface level looks, like, oh, it's just a guy dancing in a carnival. That shouldn't be weird. But he portrays it in a way where you're like, something's off, man. Something ain't right about this. And it's really cool. I think just throughout like the opening, and we can talk about more as, there's a lot of setup in this film. He does a remarkable job at setting the dramatic and thematic tones for the film, so that, the rest of the film should hit for you. And we'll talk about that later.
I do want to hear generally just kind of broadly where the movie maybe lost you in the later acts. We'll dive in more later, but just as your general takeaway.
Sure. I'll briefly describe, like, about halfway through the film, I'll say, is where there is a big set piece. And at the beginning of that big set piece, I was very invested. I thought it was like, the beginning of it, I was really engrossed. And there's like a specific moment where the movie just almost like kind of, it loses its footing, and it never really regained it for me. And that's kind of where I'll say it broadly.
Okay. Yeah. We'll definitely revisit that for sure. And as for myself, I think, and I hope this doesn't sound like a nothing burger of a take, but again, this isn't the Get Out show. But while Get Out feels masterful in so many ways, this one feels like the work of a master. And I like, and Mateo already used the word control a bit. And I don't want to make it sound like Peele wasn't, in full control on Get Out. Again, it's pretty masterful work. But in this one, in Us, it feels like we're so much more at the mercy of Peele, and his visual style and sensibilities like really like crystallize and become so much clearer in this one. Like there is and you talked about it a little bit, Seb, there's like a stillness to the camera in the visual language that is very unique to him. And we see it after Nope. It's like, oh no, like this is his style. Like this is that kind of Peele feeling. Like, and I noticed right away, and you guys already talked about in those opening scenes, those still child POV shots. It's like, especially compared to like, the kind of handheld and shakiness of Get Out, it's an immediate shift. And we talked about even in the pregame how, like Peele's unafraid to like let questions go unanswered, but he's also he's just so in control of the frame and what is visible in it. Like what he wants us to see and the coverage as a whole, like feels so deeply considered. And like we said, even from that very beginning flashback scene, like we're watching this, mom, dad, and child, watching them from just this single wide shot. And like, we're barely even seeing the parents' faces. Like it really, like we're only getting like the child's face more than anything. And that's, again, a small example of just like, we're just seeing what he wants us to see. And just like with the world building, like he really, really does understand that like things left to the imagination can be so much more potent, especially visually sometimes. And just like as a whole, I felt like the frame compositions just like shot to shot were like so much more interesting in this one, like than in Get Out, which is a conversation that we want to return to later. But yeah, he's just, it really is like Vance was saying, like for me at least, a substantial step up just visually in terms of just like framing and creating images.
I want to say, and this kind of relates to how he directs the horror in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And also, you know, a little bit of the sound point that Seb mentioned. Very few like, you know, musical stinger, high strings,
Right.
jump scare type of stuff in this movie. A lot of the time when a character is like being pursued by something or somebody, we see it on the camera before they do. And it's that sort of like classic, you know, kind of Hitchcock thing in Psycho where like, you know, you see the knife through the curtain of the shower before she does. Like that sort of sensibility is present throughout so much of the movie. Like you'll see people like running towards characters and they're out of focus, or you know, you have in that mirror in, you know, in the funhouse scene when you finally get to that one mirror where, you know, it's not really a reflection anymore, it's the real person, and you know, they're both facing in the same direction. Like those sorts of like tiny little details visually, like I really appreciated. And it's so great to see him kind of in this jump to where, you know, Get Out is kind of like horror more on a conceptual level, and you know, is also kind of mixing in with comedy and you know, like awkward cringe sort of feeling. Us is like trying for a much more like kind of visceral
Exactly.
like unnerving horror. Like the fact that he's not kind of falling back on those like very basic jump scare tricks is so refreshing. And it's honestly like one of the things that really makes me like fall in love with the movie. And you know, just incredible cinematography. Like we talked about the child POV. I mean, that stuff is like, it's like Spielberg. Like that's the work of a master. It is the work of a master, like you said, Chris.
Love that.
I'm glad you brought that up, Mateo. I actually wanted to address that point of where Peele chooses to like focus the viewer's attention, like as far as like how he directs the horror. Because I think with Us and later in Nope, not to talk about Nope too much, but he finds the perfect synthesis between his sensibilities as a writer and his sensibilities as a visual filmmaker, where he's setting up a lot of these like threads to later be paid off. And he starts to play with that visually in Us, where he'll like set things in the frame that he doesn't necessarily call attention to, only for them to later be paid off. Or exactly, like you'll have things at the edge of like frames that are slightly out of focus and you can't quite make heads or tails of what it is, but he's setting something up and pays it off visually in a way that's really like clever and is indicative of the work of a master. And yeah, I think it's leagues better than Get Out, at least visually speaking. Like the screenplay you can debate, but visually I think it's much better than Get Out.
Yeah, what he chooses to like leave out of focus, yeah, it is one thing I wanted to bring up. It's so in that second act set piece when the daughter you know, is kind of dueling with her doppelganger, and like you see the doppelganger blurry just like run up and approach from a distance, or when, you know, when the doppelganger gets approached by like the stranger, and you just like the focus is on the daughter, but then you just see the doppelganger just piece up like blurry in the back, which is just like so much more effective, you know. And like you said, Mateo, very very visceral, especially compared to like how, you know, the cerebral, like Vance in the pregame, kind of temporal nature of Get Out. But yeah, what were you saying, Seb?
I was just gonna briefly talk about the progression of Jordan's visual style that we were talking about. Like, oh, there's a step up from Get Out to Us, and then Nope. I wanted to mention nighttime shooting. I think that that is a very big. I mean, he's almost, you know, kind of, you know, groundbreaking in a lot of ways. I know Nope specifically, he created new technology to shoot outside at nighttime. But even in Us, I could tell, I was like, he is figuring things out like in a way that I don't think any other director is. He understands, you know, these visceral feelings that you feel at nighttime, where it's like there's not a lot of people outside at nighttime, so you let a lot of nature's sound come in. You allow kind of the lamp post take up, be the main source of light, and it never feels, like you're on a stage. It always feels like she's running down that street, and it feels like a real street. Or you're right outside someone's house, and the only lights that are there are like the lamps outside the house that are illuminating everything. And all the lighting is fantastic. So I wanted to really, pay credence to the set design, and obviously just how he shoots at night.
And it's little moments for me, like when like during the house invasion scene, when even little things like when when the doppelgangers like really like breaching into the house, and there's just this like simple like slow 360 as they're all entering, and I was like, am I watching Blowout right now? I was like, well, this is I'm like, this is amazing. And even and so many other gobblers would just like have a million different cuts to where everyone's entering, but just in this like methodical turn, you see everything you need to see, everything you want you to see, and it's so dread-inducing. And like,
talking about the cinematography real quick, like this shot is in here for like maybe a second, but there's an overhead shot at Tim Heidecker and Elizabeth Moss's house. After, like, I took a picture of it on my TV and I texted everybody and I said, Jordan Peele is a sicko. And it's just like this overhead. And you have like one of the sisters, the children of Tim Heidecker, like just like splayed out on this like on top of this like glass table, like just like a completely like grotesque, like semi-alive body. And they're just all like, the family is all kind of like standing around it like a dinner, and it's like they're like sitting around this on the couch. It's like so like uncanny and disgusting, and it's there for like a moment.
And it's like guys is like propped up too, like they're just chilling.
Yeah.
I mean, like, he's just like, he's a sicko. Like that's like the kind of like visual styling that you need to make a great horror movie.
Because it's the way it's revealed too. It's like the family's sitting around watching the TV. It's like the driving crooner edit, how it keeps editing further out, and then it goes wide. It's like, wait, they're just sitting in front of this like dead girl's body right now. Like it's crazy. But what were you gonna say, Vance?
I was just gonna say, like, it's interesting that you bring up Blowout, because like looking at this film visually, there are lots of like kind of nods to De Palma. Like, you can tell that he's kind of a big inspiration for Peele, at least visually. Like, there's a shot during the home invasion sequence where he captures like Tim Heidecker and Elizabeth Moss just getting like brutally murdered, like, and it's shown like removed from the house, like it's completely detached. We're just sitting outside, like watching through windows as like people are getting like horribly murdered. And I think it's really interesting how Peele's like visual sensibility kind of puts the movie in conversation with like the rest of like film history, where it's like Us and Sisters are in conversation in the same way that like Blowout and like the Blow Up are in conversation, or like any number of De Palma movies are in conversation with any number of Hitchcock movies. So I think that even putting those like kind of visual references in cement Peele as like a film literate like director, in the way that a lot of the great kind of like masters of filmmaking, or like the people who are considered like the greatest filmmakers ever, like are. So I thought that was interesting, and it's something I never really thought about until I watched it a few days ago.
No, yeah, I love that. And that shot you were talking about, that wide of watching like the Heidecker family, that's the one I was talking about in the pregame, a little bit of this, like, when I first saw that shot, I like, I've seen people be killed in movies before, but like you said, that like just detached, cold nature of it was like, it was so unsettling to me in that time. And
it happened so fast. Yeah, it happened so fast.
It's merciless.
It's like blink it, you miss it. Yeah,
it's unceremonious way just to kill that family. Like it really, really stuck with me. Yeah. Ugh.
It kind of sits with like the rest of the movies, like the way that he mines horror, because the things in it that are scary are not traditionally scary. It's things that are odd. Like it's just there's something here that's slightly off, and like he minds a lot of discomfort out of that, and like just watching these people die in like such a cold and like distanced way, like it's not like it's chilling more than it is scary, and I think that's what makes a lot of Peele's horror like effective, at least to me.
Like you could easily make it a whole sequence of like screaming and all that, but to almost mute the screams from outside the house is just inspired.
It's the sound thing that you were talking about before. Too.
Exactly. I think sound almost stood out to me like the most in this film. He is a master.
Yeah. And to echo something Mateo was saying earlier, it's like his like lack of reliance on jump scares is something I was thinking about. It kind of across all three of his movies, because I think all three of his films so far are like deeply rewatchable, especially compared to like other horror films, we'll say. And when I was trying to like diagnose the reason for that, I feel like most people would point to like the puzzle box nature of his movies, and be like, oh, you rewatch them to like solve them. And then that is valid in some ways. I mean, especially in this one, it's like one of my buddies who loves this movie. He also gave it his first rewatch recently, and he was like, this is just like a different movie after the twist. Like it's amazing, the recontextualization. I'm sure we'll touch more on that later. Especially like Peele's just like magic trick he pulls off of making things seem so obvious and so readable on a rewatch, but you didn't pick up at all in the first time. It's like I don't know how he does that. In this case, it's with Lupita's character. But while I think that's all true to an extent, I think it's his use of levity and his lack of jump scares, and finding the horror and things that are like truly scary and interesting. I think that's what makes it rewatchable. Like that's what makes me want to revisit these movies, or makes them so much more just easy to dive back into.
Which I appreciate as a guy who hates jump scares. Like it just easily, puts Jordan Peele on another echelon for me.
No, I agree. Yeah, because like I don't know about you guys, but I probably like, I'm not getting jazzed to rewatch something where like I'm dreading like, here comes that jump scare. I mean, that's just a me thing in a lot of ways, but sure. But any last words you guys want to talk about, just like on the visual front? I mean, we can talk about it more later.
So I don't know if this actually, you can cut this part out, Chris. I don't know if you talked about it on the pregame, Vance, or if this was after we finished recording, but you talked about that one shot.
Oh yeah,
Is it the split diopter?
Yeah, it's that.
Yeah,
let's go.
It had to be. I think Mateo and I both guessed it, and as soon as I saw it, I was like, "This has to be what he's talking about," because my jaw was on the floor.
I was like, "That's Van's score. That split diopter was Van's score for sure."
It's just that he's doing the Carrie shot. Like if you guys have seen Carrie, there's like a split diopter shot in the classroom. Like, and I'm like, I lost my Carrie yet. Oh. I lost my mind. Like when when I first saw it in theaters, I was like, oh, he's doing the Carrie shot, like the Carrie diopter.
If you don't work with cameras and stuff, just for context, like the split diopter is basically like you're just like shifting, you're like putting something on the lens to like kind of like crush the distance between like two different planes on the camera and make it look like they're on the same plane. And like every time I see a split diopter in a movie, it's always kind of like split diopter, and like it's just kind of fun to see one, just because it is kind of like quirky and unusual. But like to see it like feel so motivated, and like despite the fact that like they're like separated, because it's a split diopter of Adelaide and Red, the doppelgangers, like, and Red is like narrating her past and like explaining all the trauma like to her, and like there's this distance between them, but you're also like forcing them together in like this very like uncanny and discomforting way. Like it's such a motivated, and like I love it when a trick like that is used in such a motivated way. I mean, it was masterful. Like that whole sequence just had my jaw on the floor.
I mean, I completely agree with, that to me was the shot of the movie, because it could have easily been like one of those quick shots, like you mentioned, like the one overhead, but they stay on it for quite a bit. It's probably like 2 minutes of the movie of her like explaining the past. It's a whole exposition dump in the best way possible. I mean, this is like my favorite moment of the third act, because Lupita is almost just acting straight with her eyes and her voice, obviously, but like to have her face that close and to be that engrossed in what she's saying, like you're hanging on every word. the shot to me is up there as one of the best that Jordan's ever done, because there's so many different ways you can do, the big reveal that, like, where you explain it all, and to have it in such a unique perspective like that, where you're not focused on the person who's receiving the information, you're focusing on the person who's giving the information. I think that makes it way more interesting, that she is dumping the trauma, like you said, and we want to see what, how she feels, and how she looks while giving this, rather than how it looks for Addie when she's receiving this information. I think that it is the hidden part of that shot that gets under discussed.
Yeah, that's a great shout, because it's an example of just the director, like, just knowing what the most interesting part of a scene is, and just putting the camera there. There's a moment when I want to revisit this kind of like 5-minute stretch later, but it's when they're driving back to Santa Cruz and they kind of re-arrive at the pier. And we were talking about how, Peele is just so in control of how much visual information we are receiving. And it's when they pull up in the car, it's so effective how you just see the carnage of just what was left there. Like, you just see all these other civilians and all these strangers. There's like, you see just like their dead bodies in the streets. And I think it's an amazing example of just leaving the viewers to just fill in the gaps and imagine what happened, and just like seeing how these bodies ended up in these really odd places. And again, I think it's so much more effective just to be to almost, you immediately start visualizing, almost like running simulations of like, well, how do you end up there? It's it's like, where was his doppelganger waiting? And that brings me what I want to talk about with how, like, with so many of the movies we've already talked about on this podcast, you kind of have to view like so many of these 21st century films through the lens of like the prevalence of and the power that like Marvel had over audiences. And I say that because especially in 2019, peak Marvel, like Marvel brain had us thinking, like, when watching a movie, or had a lot of people thinking that, like, we just need to know how every mechanic works and how this machine is running. We got to know every bolt and screw and how everything ties together, because that was kind of like what they were best at. And, and they had us living in this world where every dot gets connected. And if you could fill in the blank, you did. And I remember this film, we talked about it a little in the pregame, got a little punished at the time for not totally obeying this law, especially in a post-Last Jedi world where suddenly everybody cares about like in-universe logistics above all else, and like following
how hyperspace works.
Yeah, like how hyperspace works. It's like, God, we'll save that for another pod. And I remember people saying like, like the more you think about the tether world, the less it makes sense. And that's why I think Vance's words of wisdom from the last pod ring true. Like, don't think, just feel. Just feel it. It's like how do the tethers make you feel? Because like how the mechanics of the tunnels work is just not the point. And I think the weaker version of this podcast is just us trying to solve all the in-universe mechanic implications and all the what ifs and unanswerable questions, like all the fun theory stuff that makes for good YouTube videos. I don't think is what makes this movie interesting, or what Peele's concerned with, or what we're really concerned with either. I think it'd be fun to talk about, but these feelings, because this is such a visceral movie and how that makes us feel. That's what's interesting. And leaving so much to the imagination is what makes it so much more impotent. And so I just kind of wanted to get your guys' takes on just on just kind of where you fell with just like the world building and just the richness of it all. Because I have a couple more thoughts there, but I want to monologue too.
I would like to quickly play the devil's advocate, because I'm pretty sure I'm probably the one who's lowest on this part. It's definitely one of my knocks on the film, and not even for a logic standpoint, because I think the tethering is a fantastic idea. I find that all very fascinating. I found the reveal of like everyone in the tunnels, like almost like zombie like kind of repeating what everyone's doing above. That's a great moment. And I'm never questioning like why are they in the classroom? Why are these people here doing these actions? Yeah. That to me, I absolutely agree. I do not care. Feel, don't think.
Brain. Yeah.
But I do think it was underdeveloped. I think that there was room to explore it more, even just in demonstration, not in explanation. So you have the moment in the closet where they're mirroring each other, and that, I guess kind of turns into the moment with the car where they go back into the burning car, and that's like how he solved that problem. But that's really the only moment where the tethering is used as like an action for the characters to kind of utilize to solve one of these problems. It's really, never brought up again as a plot point or something to explore. It's more just like something that is discussed briefly in Red's monologue at the end. But that's to me, I think it's a very visually compelling thing. But I think since it's so compelling, to not really have anything else in the film, demonstrate it or explore it was a little disappointing to me, because I felt like that's such a huge part of what, are these two factions and how they're connected. To not have that explored, it was a bit weird to me. And as well, like there's a moment with Elizabeth Moss, which I thought was so good, where she has captured Addie. She's in the room doing makeup, and she's just like making faces in the mirror. And I was like fascinated by
that
this
moment's
moment
great.
because because it's just like you're learning something about like what these characters want, a motivation. You're just like, oh, do they want to just take over these people's lives, or do they want to be able to feel like they're in control? And no words have to be spoken at all. It's very visually compelling. To me, those moments were few and far between. That like I wasn't learning things about characters or the world. It was just about like getting from point A to point B. How do we kill one of these doppelgangers? And that's where I was like feeling like the movie was falling flat, was that the comedy was feeling a little out of place, like kill count, and then like talking about just where is it being a tethered moment? Where is it just like these are two people who look the same and they're trying to kill each other? Like there felt like an imbalance in the movie to me, and I wasn't sure how it was all going to be cohesive at the end. Even though I do like the ending of the film. So
sure, I have thoughts, but what are y'all thinking?
Yeah, I mean, the actual mechanics of the world itself don't really bother me. Like, if I'm being honest, like it's not something that I'm concerned with necessarily. Like, even if you want to apply logic to it, I guess like these people are kind of thrown into the situation, so I think their first instinct, if anything, is like self-defense rather than trying to like, oh, okay, well, how do we use our like logic and reasoning, I guess, to figure this out. It's like they're thrown into this like animals basically, and just have to figure it out. And I think I don't know. I think that the like Pluto's death towards the end like doesn't really break anything for me. It's like, oh well, it's like, well, they finally figured that out, and it's like by the time we get there, we're basically at the end of the movie anyway. So it doesn't really like act as like a negative or a positive for me. It's just how it is.
It's just never discussed, like they never even talk about the tethering, which felt kind of weird to me.
Right. I mean, that's just like a different Strokes thing.
I mean, they aren't watching the movie for what it's worth.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
I understand what you're saying. And Mateo, I want to get to your thoughts on this, because I remember, Mateo, in your Letterboxd review, you talked a little bit like about just the subconscious nature of it all, and how like jokes like the kill count, you're like, that's like, you were more interested in almost the kind of like evil nature of that. Like you're like, I think there's something more interesting there. I do want to get to that in a second, because Seb, on the first time I watched this movie, I was in your shoes a lot, because I remember during the Pluto fire scene and the way Pluto and the sun are interacting, I do remember briefly wishing that there was more of that in the movie. And because I love that dynamic of like, how do you outthink yourself and all that? And the movie only deals with that for like 20 minutes, like that's only like, again, that dynamic of like, how do you beat your tether in this like strategic way, this like almost chess way, isn't in the movie for very long. And I think that's what you were kind of talking about. And on this rewatch, I was thinking, I was like, okay, I kind of U-turned on that. I kind of heel turned on that original take of mine, because I was like, and we've talked about this before on the pod, of the kind of the sticky criticism of, I just think it's sometimes best to avoid, dwelling on maybe what the movie should have been, as opposed to, the one it's consciously trying to be. And I think that's the divide between you and Vance right now, because I think you're like, that's really interesting. I wish we spent more time there. And Vance is more like, that's just a different movie in a lot of ways, you know? And then what I realized is that the mechanic of like, how do you beat your tether? I realized I think that was maybe at the time me just wanting it to be like a movie or movies that already exist. I feel like there are other movies out there of like, how do I outthink this guy? Like we think like even in like kind of like any of those like Hannibal Lecter movies, you know, that's kind of like the dynamic between Will and Hannibal. But I understand what you're saying. Like this is a really rich, like huge concept, you know. And what's so interesting about this is that like this is such a realized idea and world, but these 2 hours are the only time we have with this world, you know? And I think it's so interesting. And it almost made me glad that Peele has as much ownership over this thing as he does, because like there are so many other cases where like we would have some freaking Amazon original series that's like stories of the tethered, you know, like, and us anthology, like, and it's just different perspectives happening on that world and filling in those blanks Marvel style. And like,
Right.
I can see both sides of being like, you know, maybe we can explore more dynamics like in that Pluto fire scene, or you can take it the other way and be like, I think that means we should just cherish the novelty of what we have in these 2 hours. So just
I think maybe it is.
Mhm.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I think it was just mainly maybe I just prefer like the Christopher Nolan way to do it, where it's like the overall explanation of the mechanic. You know, where it's like in Tenet, they describe that thing to death. And to be honest, I probably don't want it to be done to death that way. Just to explore, I just feel like maybe the movie could have benefited from like another extra 15, 20 minutes.
All right, yeah.
Just to,
I do want to
some
comment.
whiteboard of like, yeah, no.
yeah, you know.
I do want to comment on the Pluto scene a little bit.
Mhm.
Okay.
And sort of take Seb's side a little bit, but also disagree in a strange way, because
Hit me.
I think that scene, you know, yeah, you can like kind of labor over the mechanics, and maybe the mechanics are like a little fraught, or, you know, like maybe you want to think about them more. But I think that scene is actually a lot more like intentionally planned than it might seem to be, because I think there's a reading of that scene where Red has planned this moment out to kidnap Addie's son at the end, because she is hiding behind that van and swipes him the second that he steps backward.
That was a great reveal.
The out of focus.
You have to think, did she like set this stage up to have that moment happen where she can take the son? Like that was what was going through my head. Like I think that scene maybe is maybe is a little more thought out than anybody's giving it credit for.
Oh, yeah. There's definitely
it is very unnerving. Like
yeah.
She like Red is kind of, despite the fact that she is like operating from like essentially she you know, she's like a 9-year-old who has like completely stopped development at 9 years old, because, you know, that's all that the experience that she had on the surface world, like that, like she is like surprisingly like calculating in this movie. And so I want to go into the themes and like kind of what I did mention in my Letterboxd review, and this is going to be a crazy plane to land, but the pilot,
the
I don't have air traffic
just
controllers.
came on. Yeah,
all the pilots are dead. I'm the last guy on the plane. I think so. Yeah, I think this movie, like, first of all, yeah, there's like that those like jokey bits about like the kill count, and it's like, oh, do we get their car now? Like those moments to me are like all about like how like under the surface, how materialistic, especially Winston Duke, the dad character, is, and like he's like passing that on to his son, you know, who's like worried about like getting like Tim Heidecker's car, and like you know, there's like that insecurity about like who has the nicer house, and like the fact that that's like all that all continues to persist through the trauma, like and through like this horrific event, like shows how enduring that mindset is, and like what gets passed down to your children, like, and then like the violence of it, and how like it becomes like this point of like pride between them, and like almost like a competition in like a silly way, where like they're like fighting over who has the most kills. Like the fact that they're like bonding over that is very, very, very dark. And I think it all comes back to maybe the tethered are like kind of an allegory for like this very like horrific for like these very like unconscious like dark urges that exist, and that final descent down and facing off against her doppelganger is almost a coming to terms with that in a very dark way. And yeah, I mean, there's so much to that tethered world that fascinates me. Like, I think it's like almost also like an inverted allegory of the cave from Plato. Like, instead of having somebody who has been trapped in this cave their whole life going out into the light and like seeing the truth and wanting to spread it back, you have somebody who has seen the light forced back down into the cave that they've never seen it before. And like, you almost get the opposite reaction of like how Plato describes that story in the Republic. Like, I mean, like, if a movie is like jostling with like Greek philosophy on that level, like, I want to give it so much credit. And yeah, like, even if there is a soft middle to this movie where like they're just kind of getting from point A to point B, like, to go for those concepts like with that level of ambition is like, it makes me like respect a movie so much.
Yeah,
love that.
I to that point, going back to the Pluto like death scene a little bit, there is something like that feels so kind of primal and like so like almost like biblical about that, like the sins of the father, like and how like the children are being punished for the actions of their parents. And I think that's a very like kind of upsetting idea. It's like something that's really, to me, like very disturbing and like upsetting. I don't know. I think it's really interesting in that way. And I agree with a lot of like what Mateo was saying about the Peele kind of rooting the horror in like philosophy or like these very traditional like stories in the way that like a lot of the great like American filmmakers of like the 30s and 40s would like not an American film, but take something like M, for example, right? Where that's a movie that's very like biblical in its ideas about like justice and retribution in the same way that I think something like Us is. And I think that just goes to show like Peele's maturity, not only as like a filmmaker, but just as an author of ideas.
Love that. Yeah. I mean, really well said by the two of you. And yeah, and like you were saying, Mateo, it's like those moments where this like really like primal, when that subconscious seeps through more than anything than like in that final scene after Adelaide kills Red, and she just that scream and like those guttural sounds she lets out is just so like, again, you almost don't have the words to describe it. It's the way it makes you feel is so.
That scene to me gives the twist away almost. It's almost like a visual foreshadowing of the twist of that switch before you even like intellectually understand it. You almost understand it on like an unconscious level. And the fact that you have her son sitting in the locker, and the implication is that he saw everything happen and he can't look at his mother the same way anymore. You almost know that he knows too.
Yes.
And that's really what the ending demonstrates.
In that final shot. I was gonna say just the Paul Date. I mean, does he know? Yes, the little kid. Oh, we're gonna say something.
No, I was just saying. The thing that I think beyond above all else that Jordan excels at is being a subliminal director, someone who is able to imprint ideas and messages in your head almost without you even knowing or understanding. If he has like a twist that he wants to give away, or even like specific themes, I feel like there's a lot of visuals and a lot of even actions by the characters that they'll do, and you not understand in the moment while you're watching, or it sticks with you, and then it comes full circle later on. You see a rabbit at the beginning where there's the title card, or you see some just weird things by Addie as a kid, or when she's older, like why is she at first you think she's so afraid of the Muir house because it's like, oh yeah, she had a traumatic event there and she couldn't speak for a little while, but then it's like, oh, turns out it was because that was her first time outside in the real world. Stuff like that I think is done so carefully, and which is why maybe where some of my frustrations have come from is just like, so he clearly thinks about a lot of this stuff. So to like a very specific point, it feels like weird that some of these things are like, undercooked in my opinion, where it's just like, there's so much there. There's so much richness. And I totally understand, like, less is more in a lot of cases, especially for horror. And that's definitely, the route he took for some of these things. And maybe it's just greedy of me. Maybe I'm just like, I just wanted more of this world,
Yeah.
And that's maybe a testament to him. So I almost wanted to like compliment him on it, like to the fact it's like, I wanted more. And that's where it's like, it's hard to bash the film on that. But at the same time, it's just like the pacing of the film felt weird to me after the halfway point, where I felt like, and maybe it's because it's a non-traditional type of horror film. It kind of hits the ground running and doesn't really stop till the end, to be honest. Like that house set piece in the middle is like 30 minutes long. It's a long set piece. So I do want to give credence that he's not trying to tread any old ground. He's absolutely trying to like do different things and maybe unsettle you because you're expecting maybe the movie to move along and you're like, we're still here. Like maybe something's going to happen that I don't expect. So I feel like there's definitely a balance to it, and where you land on it, I feel like, it is not almost anyone's fault. If you like were engrossed by the film, that is awesome. And the same thing for, it's like, if you weren't vibing with it, I feel like that's not you not getting it. It's just like, it's untraditional. And in that sense, like, it's just, maybe you weren't able to like, just like me, like mentally kind of stay with Jordan, where he was going. I think both are totally like fine, obviously.
Yeah. I like that. Well said. Yeah. And like you said, it is, I mean, quite literally hits the ground running in some ways. I mean, it's like a 2-hour chase movie. And I remember I had to go to the bathroom like at one point, and like I hit pause. I was like, yo, we're an hour in. Like it like, this thing does move in that first half a lot. I mean, for someone moves fast the entire time, but again, like you said, opinions vary. And to touch on another thing you said, it's like with each movie, like Peele, like he gives the audience like less and less pieces of the puzzle. Like his puzzle box is full, but he's holding back pieces for, like, his in Get Out, where a lot of people respond to that one. It's just like you are given all the pieces to assemble the full picture yourself. But with each movie, and again, and even more, nope, he's just like, yeah, you're only getting 80 pieces this time. He's like, good luck, Governor. Like, this is, deal with it.
And like, a 250,
and it's a 500-piece puzzle.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, nope, it's like a 2000 4K puzzle, and he's like, best I can do is 18 pieces. He's like, that's all you're getting. but he is so good about just like, again, making these images and ideas that just like they don't leave you. Like I've seen so many people just like, and like, or even like critics be like, yeah, I watched this and like a month has passed, I'm bumping it up a half star. Like I haven't stopped thinking about it. Even our friend Jewel, with every Peele movie, it's like it comes out and she'll be like, I don't know how I'm feeling about that one. And then we watch her in real time be like, guys, I'm still thinking about it. Like this is like I guess it's a 5-star. Like I guess that's where I'm at. Like it's just aging like fine wine, to put it in a very, in kind of layman's terms. But
I want to hear what your question was, Chris.
Oh,
Chris has been hyping up.
We're
in between the pre and the post game. Chris has been hyping up that he has like the most interesting question of all time to ask us about this movie. And me and Seb have been waiting with bated breath to hear what it is. So he better not let us down.
No, this is the first I'm hearing of this question.
Oh,
it better be a banger.
Oh, it is. And we're getting there.
Like that is film fight question to end all film fight questions. Like
believe me, we're getting there. There are two last things I just want to touch on real quick. So, first one, I just want to talk about Lupita for a little bit. Like, she is, again, we've already praised her a bit. She's as good, if not better, than we remember, I feel like. And I always think it's amazing when someone with like minimal alterations, like not much makeup, not many prosthetics, they can just disappear into a role. Because a lot of times it's like, oh, I couldn't even recognize this person. It's like, well, yeah, because it's like Colin Farrell and Batman. It's like, yeah, you literally can't recognize them. But when it's just like, because of their acting, you're like, that's not the same person. That's when I think it's awesome. And when I'm watching Adelaide's Tether, when I'm watching Red, it's like in the best way. It's not even registering for me that I'm watching Lupita. Like I'm watching like a good Lupita performance. I'm like, oh, that's just red. Like that's just that's just the tether. Like, and the only aesthetic difference is like she has different hair. That's like pretty much it. And it's incredible physical performance. And like Seb said in the pregame, Peele really is such a good like director of actors. You know, I think all of them. I mean, I'll get to Heidecker in a sec. I think all of them kind of transform into the tethers really well. Heidecker's making some choices as his tether. And Mateo, I remember you were excited to watch him. How are we feeling about Tim? How are we feeling about Tim in this movie?
He is like such a.
He's a goober.
I mean, I hate to put it this way, but he's kind of an asshole, right? And like,
yeah.
But like, and then like, yeah, his tether is like, he's like almost like this like gorilla, like
his bits.
He's like very like, yeah.
I hope my tether has bits.
He's like very like instinctual and like ridiculous, and like, you know, the hair is like a little ridiculous, and like the look is kind of silly, but. I mean, he kind of is embodying his surface world counterpart in like, you know, the sort of uncanny way. Yeah. I think pretty well, all things considered. Yeah.
No, one of my friends, he like loves this movie, loves Tim Heidecker, and he like just rewatched Us like this morning because he wanted me to like maybe like relay some of his takes just because like he's like wanted to be in part of the conversation, and like and in one of the notes he took just said OJ joke hits. Like, like that, I just laugh at. He's like, "Oh, it's OJ out there." It's so stupid, but I laugh out. I thought that was good, but
I mean, the the police bit is still utterly like iconic. Like I still haven't forgotten about it. It hit just as well this time. Like that might be Jordan's best joke. So good.
Oh, it's great to watch Heidecker in this movie because it's like. It feels like almost like he's like getting away with something, right? It's like if you put Tim Heidecker in like a $20 million like studio horror movie. It's like, is he allowed to do that? Like, no, it's awesome. He honestly like sneakily might be my favorite performance in the entire movie. He's so good.
Now
he's that good.
That's funny.
He is like he's having fun. He's making choices.
Yeah.
He's allowed to cook. They let him cook.
I love his tether bit where he like goes to like help Elizabeth Moss and then he just like slicks his hair back. Like
she fell for the classic blunder. The classic blunder.
That goofball, you know.
That's so funny.
Yeah, God forbid a guy has bits, you know. But
they can't just let a guy be goofy.
But again, like Lupita is one of those performances that's so good that makes you go like, bruh, who was nominated this year? Like who got nominated over her? And almost trying to cope, I was like, oh, surely it was a stacked year and I forgot. Let me be clear, it was not. It was not. The nominees in 2019 for Best Actress were Charlize Theron for Bombshell, everyone's favorite film, Bombshell, Cynthia Erivo and Harriet. Okay, and then we had, we had ScarJo and Marriage Story and Saoirse Ronan and Little Women. Locked, valid. Those were great. And then we had the winner, Renee Zellweger for Judy. All I can say is there was room. There was ample room.
There was room.
Okay, I think that's all that needs to be said about that. So that holy smokes. Yeah. Okay. And
I thought it was on the Judy cast. I thought you guys were pro Judy, but
again, apologies. I can't say there's a Judy Postscript movie on the Postscript pod on the docket. Sorry, guys.
My Judy head's at.
You can take it up with you can email some complaints. Yeah. Sorry to all the Judy heads. And then two last little things I want to touch on. And these kind of almost turning into segments of ours. We talked about it a little bit. I feel like for you guys, the "this is why we play" moment was just the split diopter shot and the most like masterful exposition dump ever.
You know what? This is why we play for me. I mean, that was one of them, but I think the real "this is why we play" was cross-cutting the fight with the dance flashbacks and mirroring, kind of her dance
ballerina,
her ballerina type, almost like fighting style with. I hate to call it a fighting style with the flashback dance. Like that was my. This is why we.
I respect
that's pure editing. Just
I respect that.
perfection.
I guess even beyond the split diopter shot, my this is how we play moment is that final shot where Peele shoots the California hills like it's Monument Valley.
Yes.
Like he's John Ford like weaving his camera like through the mountains, like, and we're just seeing like all of these like hundreds and hundreds of extras, whether they be digital or like they really shot people there. Like I assume it's probably digital, but even still, there's like a visual poetry there that like brings a little tear to my eye, and I think this is why we make movies, So.
I love that, and that was one of my buddy's notes too. He was like, "That final shot just rips." And then Mateo, that moment is just like that is capital C cinema. Like that's like a virtuosic, just like he's going for it in that final scene, and also like not to be that guy. It is a great way to get around like having to shoot, one person playing two roles is to shoot them wide in the dark. Like that's like, I'm going to say that I'm like, oh, I saw the seams. It's because it's so good. Like I'm not thinking about that while I'm watching it. But for me, it's a little bit of cheating, but it's like the 5 minutes, like I said, when they arrive back in Santa Cruz, going from seeing the carnage left behind, to the Pluto, walking back into the fire scene. And then just it's the first time we see again, just that simple visual of just the hands across America line. It's literally just like, all right, let's get 50 people and have them line up and hold hands. But like, it's just perfect. It's amazing. And it's such a simple, like, I've never really seen that before, like it's just amazing. and yeah, I think those 5 minutes is just like, he's just like nailing every three in sight. And I absolutely love that. And there was on the Godzilla pod, I talked about how there were like 10 seconds, 10 randomly inspired seconds, like with like the music choice, with those like when it became really like minimalistic and like dissonant with the piano, and I was like, okay, like I let him cook, I guess. Almost the same thing happened in this movie. It's when they're arriving at the beach to meet the Heidecker family, and it goes to this like really cool overhead shot with like those shadows approaching on this beach, and the score just like I don't know what instruction he was given, but the score it goes to this really like rhythmic, like almost like tribal, just like thumping, just like banger, like 15 seconds when they're just walking on the beach, and I'm like, okay,
it's the shadows, it's the visual poetry, it's the foreshadowing.
That's so obvious. I'm such a goober. Yeah, that's such an obvious visual metaphor of literally the shadow.
Foreshadows.
Wow.
Foreshadows.
Wow. Okay.
Foreshadows.
That is a foreshadow in every single sense. Okay. Well, I feel like a gobbler now, but I mean,
Chris is gonna cut that in post.
Yeah. Yeah, you gobblers aren't in charge of the edit. No. I'll leave it in. Again, I don't have much to add on to, just like this is going harder than it has any right to, and I'm here for it. All right, but the seatbelt side is back on. All right, maybe some turbulence in this plane right now. So here's the question I was cooking. This is a thought experiment I want to throw at you guys in the form of kind of two complementary questions. And this thought hit me while watching the movie last night, and I was just kind of paralyzed thinking about it because I was like, wow, this is again like the Billy Ray Cyrus meme, much to think about. Everyone else does not know this question. I did not let them prepare. I'm just going to throw it at you guys. So like I mentioned in the pregame, Get Out was one of the handful of movies from the past decade to be included on the Sight and Sound list for the 100 greatest films of all time. And this is kind of like a microcosm or small representation of what this movie's like legacy and impact is as a whole. And during the movie, I thought to myself, if we lived in a world where Us was Peele's debut and not Get Out, would Us be on the Sight and Sound list? And let me follow that up with another complimentary question. We talked about how Us inevitably suffered from being the follow-up to Get Out. If Us was Peele's first movie and Get Out was his second, would Get Out have suffered more from being the follow-up to Us than Us suffered by being the follow-up to Get Out?
Very good question, Chris.
Yeah.
Like,
Mateo just backed up to the other side of the room. Yeah. Just take as much time as you guys need. I
mean, I think Get Out is the superior film. I don't want to give an easy answer. So I personally think Us would stay off the Sight and Sound list and Get Out would still be on it. I do think that film's excellence, Get Out's excellence, stands for itself. I think that movie, I mean, you could argue the fact that it was a debut film maybe elevated it, but I still think like people talk about Get Out as, a top 5 film of the 21st century. You know what I mean? Like it's it's one of those films that's, if someone had it in their top 5 or top 10, no one would bat an eye. If Us was on that list, you'd be like, whoa.
If
Like,
let me throw
that's
this at you. If Get Out was his second film, would it be on the Sight and Sound list still?
No.
Oh.
Whoa.
Or I'm
Oh.
sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry. Yes. I'm sorry. Yes.
So you
I'm
think
sorry.
yes? Okay.
Okay. Us was still in my brain. I'm sorry.
Oh no, you're valid. So
Yeah.
so you think Get Out's greatness does transcend the novelty of it, and the first timeless of it.
I think Get Out, like the amount of time Jordan spent on making that film, the amount, like, because he said he had been thinking about it for 10, 15 years, it shows, like when you watch that film, it's just such a complete process. Someone who had gone over it like over 100 times. He had trimmed that thing to where, like we always talk about, like it's one of the tightest scripts ever made. I truly do believe that.
Okay.
I'm on board with that. So I do think it stands for itself.
Okay. That's valid. That's about where I expected you to fall on it, but I know Mateo and Vance are thinking.
I'm one of the biggest fans of Get Out. So
right.
Yeah. I think Get Out, to me at least, I think part of the reason why it has the clout that it has is that for like small budget horror, it almost like rewrote the rules of small budget horror in a lot of ways. Like it almost like invented a genre. Like you have like movies now like 2022's Barbarian that are kind of going for like, similar tones. Like I feel like a lot of horror now feels like it has to sort of weave social critique into the script in a very explicit way. I think Get Out created those expectations, I think, for modern horror. And I think studios pressured movies to do this because they don't understand. They think that Get Out was a successful movie because of the content of the movie and not because it was made by a great director. So they kind of make every movie have the same things now. So I think to get to my point, I think part of Get Out's clout is that as a debut, like on a sort of Hollywood meta level, was as successful as it can be, that it gives it this like position where, it gets to be on a Sight and Sound list. In 20 years, if I had to say, if Jordan Peele keeps cranking them out, I don't think Get Out will be the one. I think he's got so much more in his head. So I guess my answer to the question is that if Us had come out first, I don't think either one of them would be on the Sight and Sound list.
Really?
Ooh, okay. I think you're right. And
then the second thing, I think, I don't know how people would have reacted to Get Out. I guess like, because I think the audience expectation for like having kind of the puzzle box and like being able to YouTube all the answers to the movie, I think that audience expectation existed before Get Out. So I don't know. I think maybe Get Out would have still had the same reception that it did, even if it had been his second movie. But I wonder like who would have. I think there might have been a crowd of people who would have seen it as a slump, just because. I mean, if you just opening your eyes and just like looking at how the craft of the movie, like just how accomplished Us is.
Yeah.
I think there might have been people who would have called it a slump, but I do think that I don't think you can just switch it and then get the same result. Like I think Get Out's position as this like Sight and Sound like classic movie is connected not just to when it came out, but like what the movie itself is.
Okay. Vance, what are you thinking?
I think I'm gonna echo Mateo's sentiments a little bit, in that I think a lot of what inspired Get Out's positioning on the Sight and Sound list is very much context dependent, where it feels very much like a young man's film, right? Where it's like it's so immediate, like it's full of piss and vinegar, like. And this is a movie made by a guy who's like, he's like proving himself. I mean, despite Peele having been in the industry for like 15 years at that point, like this is a guy that's got something to prove, and he comes out with like a movie that, like, do I think it deserves to be on the Sight and Sound list? No, I don't. But I think it's a real case of right place, right time. And I think if you would like switch the order of Us and Get Out as far as release, no, I don't think Get Out would still be on the Sight and Sound list. I don't think Us would be on the Sight and Sound list either, because
Okay.
that movie's like, it's a lot. I mean, The Craft is a lot more self-apparent, but it's a lot shaggier. It's a lot looser than Get Out is. And I don't think it announces itself as much as Get Out does. Like that is a self-apparently like great. This is a great movie, right?
Mhm.
Whereas you sit down and watch Us, and it's not like announcing itself to you in that way. But I still think, like, I think at least for me, it sort of lingers with me more than Get Out does. Like even returning Get Out, like it doesn't ring true in the same way that like Us or Nope do. So I don't think that Us would be on the Sight and Sound list. And I think that there would be a perception that despite how efficient Get Out's screenplay is, if it were released after Us, that he had kind of like suffered from a bit of a sophomore slump, at least aesthetically, because of how gorgeously rendered a lot of Us is. And Get Out, as I said in the our pre-show, was is a bit of a, it feels like a first-time filmmaker. It's kind of directed like a TV movie at certain points.
Right, you mentioned that, yeah.
Like
Yeah.
As great as the screenplay is for me, there's like that element of film as a visual medium that it never quite jumps the hurdle in that way. And I think for that reason, like if both films were unchanged, I think people would see Get Out as a bit of a slump after Us, because like even in Us, even if the ideas aren't as coherent, like socially, its social ideas aren't as coherent, which it doesn't bother me necessarily.
Very easy
but
parse, yeah.
right, I think it's more interesting in that way. But like, I still think people would have issue with it for its like lack of like dynamic visuals, even if the script is it's a lot tighter, it's a lot more dynamic and economical. So yeah, that's what I think.
If my answer to would Us be on the Sight and Sound list instead of Get Out, and would Get Out even still be on it, I'll say if my answer to that was yes, if Us would be on it, then the argument would be that while Get Out's commentary is so much more overtly searing, and like we said, it's of the moment in a really potent way, and so much of it is the context. You could argue that Us, it would still have so much of the novelty that Get Out did bring. It would have, like the idea of having African Americans at the center of your horror film, the fusion of horror with social commentary, the genre bending nature of it, and that surprise. Oh, the Key and Peele guy made this. You could argue it has all of that, but just with better filmmaking. And maybe Get Out does kind of ride that wave of the surprise so much into the top 100 of all time. And I think if I were to say, yes, Get Out would suffer more being the second than Us would, I think, yeah, I mean, like I said earlier, just especially like you guys said, from a visual standpoint, when we talked about frame compositions earlier, if we went from Us to Get Out, I feel like I'd be like, yo, what happened? Like this is a like visually, like this is a step back. This would be a severe step back, And again, I don't want to make it sound like I'm like, oh, Get Out, like mid out, like Get Out, Get Out rules. But I think it's worth asking ourselves these questions. Like, would Get Out have hit less if it wasn't as much of a novelty? And so I don't know. That's something. And again, like Peele's most recent films, we're not providing the answer. We're asking the question, and I think you should ask yourself the question as a viewer, and you'll learn a lot about yourself. Trying to see where you lie on it. But yeah, okay. That being said, that was the big question. But maybe one kind of final question. Could you guys kill your doppelganger? Could you guys kill your tether? And how? Maybe.
I feel like my tether's crazy, bro. I feel like he's coming at me with like some kind of like weird like club with like nails on it or something. I don't know. I think he's armed. I think he's armed in a way that I simply am not. I don't think I don't know if I stand a chance. I'm not gonna lie.
Does he have that
I'm
dog
not a
in him
very-
more than you do? Yeah.
I'm a very violent person, so I feel like my doppelganger, considering if they acted like the tethered, they can't talk, and I don't know. It's hard to imagine like really how clever they are. So I mean, I think I could. I think, but it's a little vague. It's a little hard.
Your
to
tether
know.
may just want it more. Your tether may just want it more.
You never know. I mean, to be honest.
Vance, what about you?
I think I think I could take my tether, but like just barely. Like I feel like it'd be like it's like a Death Wish style situation where it's like this like peaceful guy. It's like he's pushed to the edge to like commit violence. Like if the tether's like coming at me, like it's like, look, I don't want to kill this guy, but like you leave me with no other option. So I guess I have to take matters into my own hands.
Right. Personally, I feel like I would just get annoyed at my tether. Like I would hear my tether also laugh, and I'd be like, "You don't get to do that. You don't get to do that too." And I would just like, I'm like, "There's not enough room for the both of us, pal." I would just get really salty. I'm like, I see my tether getting like all the other tethers to crack up, and I'm like, "Relax. Like you're not hot stuff, bro. Like that's just this." I would just kill him out of spite, to be honest. I would be angry. I'd be like, "You have beef with me? Really?" I would get so pressed over him being upset at me. I'm like, what did I do to you, bro?
Us kind of makes you think about like, oh, I really don't feel comfortable about maybe thinking that my existence is dependent on like the toiling of other people.
Makes you think. Okay. So
I was gonna say it made me think like there's gonna be some freak that has like a Phantom Thread style relationship with their tether, like being brought to like the brink of death and coming back. Like
just a toxic codependent nature with their tether.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe I just would have talked it out with them. I just would have gotten some lunch and we would have talked it out. I know we're both talkers. But as with the nature of this podcast, we even if opinions vary, we try to come to a kind of definitive statement about this film. So I think personally, if we had to diagnose the nature of Us, I would say, at least in relation to Get Out and Nope, even with the whole middle child syndrome of it all, I would say Us is equally masterful to the other two. What about you guys?
I guess I would say, you mentioned this in the pre-show, and I thought about it and I wrote it down in my notes. And like you mentioned, I think Seb mentioned it, like Get Out is a movie that is studied in like film schools for the economy of its script, like for, kind of how precise and like razor sharp it is. Like I think Us is no less worthy of the sort of granular study that we give Get Out. And that's how I would say I want this movie to be remembered as a movie that is like operating on that same level of like fascination and complexity, and it deserves that legacy, I think, just as much as Get Out, if not more.
So even though I'm maybe not the most positive of viewers, I wanted to succinctly wrap up my thoughts of like kind of Jordan as a filmmaker, but also Us in particular. I had it as undeniably provocative, that you cannot deny that you were really being overwhelmed by like a sensory experience. And obviously whether you think about it too much or not is another thing, but I think Jordan is absolutely still trying to, or he's giving you something to experience rather than to wash over and forget about.
As far as my final thoughts go, Us is kind of like the perfect like stepping stone for Jordan Peele as a filmmaker, because it feels like the exact middle ground between like his thematic ambitions in Get Out and his aesthetic ambitions in Nope. And it feels like he's trying to like sort of tie that thread a little bit here. And it's like Mateo said, I think it is worth that sort of granular study that Get Out's screenplay receives in a lot of film schools around the world. And I don't know. I think it's a great film. I think it's one of the best American films of the past 2 decades. And I really think that people should give it another shot without the preconceptions of the albatross that is Get Out, like hanging around the neck of Jordan Peele's second film. So
Right.
hey, if people give it another look, like I'd love it. I'd love them to.
Speaking of America, there is a heavy American theme in this film, and we don't have to really like go over this too much. But it was something that I maybe didn't understand necessarily. I wanted to know if y'all maybe picked up on it, like the "We're Americans" line from Red, and then obviously the commercial at the beginning with everyone holding hands. I wasn't sure exactly what Jordan was getting at with that.
Like I don't know, maybe it's just like a general class thing. Like there's like
Yeah.
there are like a bunch of people that like don't physically live under the middle class of America, but like are kind of like maybe like we're dependent on them and not like actually paying them any attention.
Yeah, they're kind
Okay.
of they're dependent on and like ultimately kind of buried and forgotten and ignored, But these people do exist, right? And in this situation, they're letting themselves be known. Yeah, it's kind of a broad inequality kind of metaphor, more than anything else.
Hey, Jordan Peele's just saying, like, workers unite, like they'll take over the world. Like that's how Us ends.
Yeah. No, real. Yeah. So between our final takeaways, it seems like our kind of thesis is that it's no lesser. It's no lesser than those other works, or maybe the praise they received. So yeah. Before we depart, and you guys can just answer with a simple yes or no to kind of maybe tease a potential future app. If Nope was Peele's first movie, is it on the Sight and Sound? just yes or no.
Yes.
Yes.
Let's go.
100%. 100% yes.
I was gonna say that's gonna be the film that we are unanimous on. I'm a huge Nope head.
Yeah, oh my god. The Nope app will go crazy, and we'll probably have to invite Vance back for that. So Vance, thank you again for being on and joining us. This was a blast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So thank you all for listening this far. Hope you enjoyed. And next week we will be discussing. I don't know why I decided before saying this. We will be discussing Deadpool, right? And maybe the fact that we go, Deadpool. That's kind of exactly why we're talking about it. So we will see you all then. See you guys.